The stock market. I thought I'd highlight that for a bit before we go to some history on Syria and a few other things that need to be covered. Global warming, Nibiru, and bloodlines, and what is life, all coming up, still to go. The stock market, which personally, I would shut down altogether. I think if we're going to fix our country, we have to shut it down, as those clowns are looting all kinds of money, as you'll find out in this piece. And for more than a decade now, the stock market has surged. And since the recession low of March 9th, 2009, the SP 500 has rocketed from 666 to 3,000 this week. That's a 350% gain in 10 years. Talk about wealth building. Except the bad news. Despite this incredible period of wealth creation, it has bypassed tens of millions of older Americans, perhaps including you. The reason that is because the wealthiest 10% of households owns 84% of all the stocks. And that includes pension plans, 401k accounts, and the IRA's accounts, as well as trust funds, mutual funds, college saving programs like the 529 plans. That means that 90% of American households only own the remaining 16% of stock. And these stats come from Edward Wolf, who's an economist at New York University, who stated this week, for the vast majority of Americans, fluctuations in the stock market have relatively little effect on their wealth, well-being, or that matter, their well-being. No shit, Sherlock. Why? Well, it's not designed for ordinary people is why. Only the greed merchants and the vultures who pick over the carcass. That's what it's all about. We are the carcass in big capital letters, because we're all dead, you see. Recently, there's been a lot of, a full-scale bombing of war on Syria. But did you know that the attacks on Syria have been ongoing at regular intervals through time? This is not the first rodeo, far from it. Several of them, particularly over the last 1,000 years. And we're going to look at one in particular. Yet again, the same people crop up and the same problems. The Aleppo massacre, often referred to simply as the events, was a riot perpetrated by Muslim residents of Aleppo, although ethnic non-Alepian groups including Bedouins, Kurds and Turkmen have also been blamed for the riot, especially by local historians, largely from the eastern quarters of the city against Christian residents. Some may already be connecting dots. Largely located in the northern suburbs of Judaid and Salabay. Now, the rioting began in October 17, 1850 and ended 2 days later, and the riot resulted in numerous deaths, including that of the Syriac Catholic Patriarch. You're going to love this one's name. Peter the Seventh Yahweh. You can't make this stuff up. and ethnic non-Aleppian groups, including Bedouins, Kurds and Turkmen, like I said, were also blamed for the riots. And it has been argued, however, that the events reflect instead more complex social dynamics, particularly the disruption caused by the sweeping reforms that were implemented by the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century attempts at modernization, which was known as the Tanzimat, and by the Ottoman Empire's incorporation into the modern world economic system. You're going to start getting it shortly. As the Ottoman Empire weakened in the 19th century, restrictions on Christians were eased due to the increasing intervention and influence of European powers. Also, they said. That's not quite correct based on this narrative. The reforms emerged from the minds of reformist sultans like Mahmud II, his son Abdul Majid I, and prominent, often European-educated bureaucrats, is the key answer, who recognised that the old religious and military institutions no longer met the needs of the empire, and part of the reform policy was an economic policy based on the Treaty of Balta-Liman in 1938. Which two entities delivered that treaty? The Ottoman Empire and the United Kingdom. And their plan was to integrate the houses again under the Edict of Gulhain. Gulhain means rose house, house of rose, rose line, Freemasonry and Templar stuff again. Now at the end of that, after that treaty was signed, it brought in the first ever banknotes into Syria, the first post office, which was the monetary banks back then, banking reform and also legal reform, and also the first ever taxation and paid tax collectors. So essentially what happened, it became crown-led in essence. Now the Armenians and Melkites were officially recognised as millets in 1831 and 1848 respectively, and 1839 reforms allowed Christians to build new churches which was previously prohibited. Setting the stage, problem, reaction, solution. Then a newly formed municipal advisory council provided Christians with the opportunity to express their opinions. And perhaps the most significant changes during the time, however, were the alterations being made to the Ottoman taxation system. Of course, Muslims didn't have it, they didn't have usury. Traditionally, direct taxation was only required for adults, non-Muslim males, through a system known as jizya. Now, jizya, Jizya, has two meanings, which is eerily similar to the US income taxes. It means tax, but it also means a tribute or compensation. Crown terminology again. For those who are new to the show, your income tax is not a tax, it is a tribute to the Crown, which is not the Queen of England and is Rothschilds. Taxes for Muslims, rather than being applied to the individual, were instead announced by the government and left to be collected by the various corporate entities, such as guilds or quarters, from among their individual members. And yet an individual head tax was introduced for Muslim residents during the Egyptian occupation of Syria in the 1830s. It's the same cult people coming in again. under Muhammad al-Pasha and was continued even after the Ottomans regained control of the region. Now, not only did this lead to increasing economic burdens upon the Muslim residents of Aleppo, spurring on dramatic decreases in their relative wealth, in other words, they're being harvested, while their Christian neighbours prospered because of connections with Europe. But it also created a sense of disillusionment in terms of the relationships between Muslims and the Ottoman state, for it undermined the distinction between Muslims and non-Muslims, thereby possibly calling into question the role of Muslims as the defender of Islam. The already apparent class distinction became more dramatic with Muhammad al-Pasha's modernization efforts and led to the increasing social discontinuity that then set the stage for conflict between the Muslim and Christian communities. You see, the Albert Pike prophecy was not just the future, but also the past. They've been playing the same game over and over again. These taxation reforms were coupled with an economic depression, go figure, that spread throughout Aleppo in the mid-1800s and were thus particularly devastating for residents of the eastern quarters of the city, for they were largely engaged in the caravan trade and the grain trade, the two sectors most deeply affected by the economic depression. All sounds very American, doesn't it? As trade with Europe increased, well, I never. Merchants who were mostly Christians and Jews prospered, well, I never again. While Muslim residents faced increasing economic hardships, and the Muslim population of the city was badly hit by inflation. Inflation, for those new, means tax. It's a secret tax, as a result of the foreign merchandise that flooded the market after Syria was integrated into the world economy. Again, this is what they've been doing with the EU. Adding countries into it, they just suck all the wealth out and then dump them all in and wait till they all collapse, and then they buy up all the assets for nothing. Now, the ease of commercial restrictions upon Christians spurred on discontent amongst the Muslims, problem, reaction, solution. They perceived this to be a threat to their traditional economic advantages in the region. Muslims also sought to stop the building of new churches without much success, and additionally Aleppo had a large Janissary faction which had been growing increasingly discontented with the Ottoman government since its abolishment in 1826. Now, the Janissaries largely resided in the eastern quarters of Aleppo and were thus particularly affected by the economic hardships. When the Greek, no surprise, Catholic Patriarch Maximus III Mazloum was carried on a procession through the city with much extravagance. Yet again, they're throwing it in people's faces. And Muslims saw this as a sign of increasing Christian domination of their city, and a celebratory fire during the festivities, sacrifice, gave rise to rumours that Christians were arming themselves. General reforms occurring within the Ottoman Empire as it attempted to modernise, specifically census taking, and the forced conscription of citizens also led to increased tensions and feelings of insecurity for the Muslim residents of Aleppo. Now, following the first ever census of Aleppo's adult males, rumours spread that the Ottoman Empire intended to begin to conscript adult males in the area, and backlash against looming threats of conscription then meant that the taking of the census became the catalyst for the 1850 riots in Aleppo. And as you can see, all the world is a stage, and his story always repeats. It's the same thing of what happened in Europe. Then they go back and loot the Middle East. It's what's happened in America. They create division amongst the people by doing deliberate policies that cause it, and the stupid people fall for it every single time. I hope this time we get clever and recognise it's not the people that are being put up as the enemy that's the problem. It's the one who made the policy that's the problem. Same applies in the UK and Europe. They complain about Muslims being in their country, and yet don't ask, why are they going in their country? Because they're being bombed out of their own homes is why. And pushed into regions to cause the very chaos that they will provide the solution for.